I have the pleasure with me with Pamela Denise Long. Sister, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. So I'm really glad to be here, Ross. Thank you. How do I introduce myself? Let's see. I'm a 7th generation American. I can trace my lineage back to the mid to early 1800s, still trying to identify 2 parents by name who were born in Virginia in the early 1800s, and then figure out who their parents were since they were born in Virginia.
Wow.
I am, for work, I'm a trainer and consultant, business consultant, implementation, particularly for implementing diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism through the trauma-informed lens. And people are probably like, why are they both smiling? And the reason I'm smiling about that is, A, I love it. And also because the way I do that work is very historically contextualized. I do not erase the significance of multi-generational Black Americans from my talking points, from the work and the way I do the work around racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think you see a lot with the way consultants go about doing things. I'm a mom, a dog mom, pretty active in the political arena. I'm a writer for Newsweek and other places. I write about a number of things, and particularly about headlines, politics as relates to the descendants of U.S. slaves, but also from an Americans First perspective, because, you know, we are a founding population of this country. And if we can't be pro-American, then I just don't even understand what patriotism is. So that's me.
Wow, that's a mouthful. But you know, I was intrigued. What type of platform is Newsweek if you had to pair it up with something?
So Newsweek is was a flagship magazine, news magazine with significant readership, you know, back in the 80s before the internet age. And since the internet age, it still has a significant presence. It's considered largely conservative leaning or Republican leaning, I guess. Right leaning maybe is the better way to say that. It focuses on politics and culture, and it's mostly online now, and maybe even exclusively online now. So you can go to the webpage, including my author's page at Newsweek, and sign up for updates so that you get information in your inbox when things are released.
Okay. So, I mean, with that said, we should just jump right in here. So we're mostly going to focus on this article you wrote here. Black leaders have sold out our community to the immigration lobby opinion. So my first question for you is, in this particular piece, you argue that the current diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are detrimental to Black Americans. So could you elaborate on how you believe DEI negatively impacting the interests of the Black community?
So when I talk about, I hear an echo. When we talk about the Black community, I am talking about multi-generational Black Americans. I'm talking about those folks whose ancestors, their families have been in the country for civil rights, before the 2023, and before independence. So, and I talk about it because everyone is people, but also because that history of American Negroes, descendants of U.S. slaves, is
excuse me, Denise. I like your sound is coming in and out. You want to probably try your earphones you want to try earlier?
I can. Sure. I noticed echo, and I wondered what was going on.
Yeah, now it's doing it now. Yeah.
So let me keep on and see.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Is the sound quality better?
It's good now. It's good.
Excellent. So I'm not sure you lost me, but I'll say, to answer that question about how it's detrimental, diversity, equity, inclusion, modern day diversity, equity, inclusion really looks at all people and all things being equal. There is no distinction between a person who just made it into the United States versus a founding population of the United States. There's no distinction between illegal aliens and citizens of the United States. The idea is that all things are equal, equal and everybody deserves everything. They equate sexuality and gender identity issues with those issues related to the descendants of U.S. slaves. I think that's a miscarriage of justice. I think that's a bastardization of equality and equity. And so, for me, when we talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion undermines the Black American community, that's kind of what I'm talking about. And immigration undermines the American community because it creates more competition for all resources, right? People talk about jobs that Americans don't want to do, but the reality is that there are jobs Americans won't do because of the pay working conditions that those Americans are based in. And when we look back at Donald Trump and the immigration enforcement efforts that he made, we saw that those ICE raids, the immigration and customs enforcement raids by visiting employers, those folks were working in factories, right? They weren't out picking strawberries. They were working in factories in the heart of the Mississippi Delta, where Black Americans were fired from those jobs. They hired illegal aliens for lower wages or similar wages, regardless. And once the raids happened for those 600 plus jobs, Black Americans were hired. So, there's a list of ways that immigration has affected Black Americans. That's just the present day. When you look back at Reconstruction, or at look back at the Iron tells quite eloquently, we see that the European immigrants who came over to the mid-1800s and 1924 didn't feel a sense of camaraderie, sense of compassion, of empathy for the freed slaves. They, in fact, wanted to maintain slavery so that they didn't have to compete for jobs. They alienated our ancestors from participating in labor unions so that they could maintain their position. They coalesced with the anti-emancipation Democrat Party in order to undermine Reconstruction and undermine the political will to make Reconstruction a reality. So there has been a 2 century at least or more.
Give me 1 second, sister. The audience is stating that we're getting some more feedback for whatever reason. So it's still an echo of sorts. I don't know if that's me. Let me check on my side very quickly. No, I'm not getting any feedback over here. Sorry about that. Let's see. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can hear it when I'm speaking here. I don't know if you have 2 computers going, because sometimes when those have 2 computers going, both the audios are reverbing off each other.
Nope, just my desktop here. So, let me see if I can. Yeah, I have no idea. Let me see if I can cancel that out.
Now, thank you.
All right. So
my dog, every time I talk, he wants me to play with him, and he starts scratching.
So, quick question for you. So I know you said that Newsweek is somewhat conservative. Are you conservative, liberal, or progressive?
So it's an interesting question, and many people ask that. I would describe myself as independent, but identify as Republican. It is hard to label me as one thing because I have far left views, like reparations. I have far right views, like immigration regulation and even implementing a moratorium on immigration, closing down the entire border until we get our stuff together. And then I have more moderate views as well. So I have conservative tendencies, but my problem with conservatism is that so much of it is defined in a way that seems to me to be action, pushback against justice to American Negroes, like some of the principles, independent individual responsibility, and all of those things are important for sure. But when you pretend that there are systemic factors that have contributed to current circumstances for all of us in unique ways, I think that there's a level of antecedent that I think is just untrue that I can't.
All right. What are your thoughts on Ron DeSantis running for president, and do you think his policies that he, have been proposing or maybe put in place are beneficial for Black Americans?
There are some times where I can appreciate the things Ron DeSantis does, and there are times where I very much don't respect what he does. And for example, I wrote a piece for Newsweek when he required that the advanced placement course, the high school advanced placement course, be revisited to take out things about communism, advocacy for communism, dismantling capitalism, and inserting Marxism into the curricula specifically, and LGBTQIA elements into the curricula in notable ways. I supported that. What I have maintained is I never want anything to be added to the teaching of Negro history that is going to be controversial. Our stuff is just too important for anything to be added to it. Are there Black people who are lesbian, gay? Of course. But if you're covered under Black, and we're talking about Black history, it is perfectly adequate and perfectly okay to talk about James Baldwin and all of those things.
Absolutely.
But to add these other elements, I think, are an extra agenda where people are trying to legitimize their agenda by hiding behind the moral authority of our Negro agenda. So that's a problem for me. So I appreciated him doing that. His decision with the election integrity. I appreciate election integrity efforts in principle. I want to make sure that the election results that we operate by are the legitimate will of the American people. But if you're going to write legislation where somehow you only end up rounding up Black folks, something tells me that something is wrong with that.
There's another agenda at hand.
Well, or you're not being intentional about capturing actual integrity issues. So with, in Florida, he implemented the election integrity deal, and it was really about people who had been convicted of a felony, but I believe the state had passed a law that they were going to discontinue disenfranchising people who'd already served their time. And those folks who they arrested had been told that they would be able to vote. They just needed to register and yada, yada, yada. So they did that. And then they wound up getting arrested. And I think it was an embarrassment. And I think just not being conscious enough about race and all of those elements to end up having something so good on paper, election integrity, look like racist in implementation, shows a lack of foresight that is problematic, or an intention that clearly is problematic and anti-justice. So he gets mixed feelings from me. And at this point, I don't think I could vote for Ron DeSantis as president.
Now, is it just based off what you just stated, or the fact that he pretty much banned African-American histories or Black American history and then signed into law or through legislation of sorts for school systems to pick up AAPI history?
So he didn't ban Black American history. I think that's another misinterpretation of what happened. That AP history course was asked to be revised on specific elements. I believe there were 8 of them or so. Those revisions happened. They weren't asking to remove any elements about actual Black history. It was all this extra stuff that was in there. Communism, Marxism, doing away, dismantling capitalism, LGBTQ. Like, they identify specific things. And not only that, but in the actual curricula and guidelines for Florida, it does mandate the teaching of Black American history and the significance of Black American contributions. Now, I don't know how people came to think that I think because he was talking about anti-woke and all of that people thought he meant that we wouldn't be talking about Black American history in any way. I think there are some ways that his comfort bills, as I am totally fine with calling them, where if a teacher is not comfortable with talking about history in a race critical way, they just don't have to talk about it, and they're not trained or required to attend trainings to learn how to talk about it. I do think that's a problem, but it's not. He didn't ban Black American history at all, actually.
But that's the rumor that's going around,
right? And that's not correct. That's not correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in your piece, you also mentioned that DEI received its moral authority from participation of Black leaders funded by white liberals. Can you provide some examples of the conflict of interest and explain how it hinders the ability of Black political leaders to deliver for their constituents?
Whew. You talk to people who are in the sort of behind the scenes political piece, like folks who were involved with the CBC at one point in time, or folks who were involved in leadership at the NAACP or the Urban League at some point in time in the past. And they will tell you, and have told me, that the donations that those sustaining donations that those organizations receive, I hear that echo. I'm not sure what happened there.
It's doing it when I'm showing this screen. That's what it is.
Okay. See, we solved it. The sustaining donations that those organizations receive from funders curbs how and restrains how adamantly those organizations come out for Negroes who legitimize their existence in the first place, and also superimposes the priorities of the funding organization onto the legacy organization. So if Acme Foundation believes in mass immigration, is Acme going to continue to fund the NAACP if the NAACP takes a hard line against illegal immigration? The answer is no. They're not going to fund you, and they're not going to fund you. And as a matter of fact, as a condition of funding, they might specify that you need to embrace and make a commitment for diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism as defined by that funding organization. And so they basically become owned. You can't bite the hand that feeds you. Right. And these people make donations and sustaining donations in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, because they have it to give away.
Have you received any backlash from your article?
I do receive backlash. I do receive by various means. Gosh, I've been called nativist. I was called nativist today when I was leading the space about Trump's announcement of ending or suspending birthright citizenship for illegal aliens. And I am not offended. I'm not offended by any of the things people call me, because I am a nativist. I do believe that American citizens, that America is a country and a nation state of citizens, and that its priority should be on securing the interest of those citizens over anybody else. And that's what a nativist is defined as. And I am that. I raise my hand. I own it. I wear the badge. I've also been called a Black white supremacist for wanting to ensure that the descendants of U.S. slaves are carved out as a constitutionally protected special class group, unlike any other group in America.
Which I agree.
Right. No matter how Black you are not a descendant of U.S. slaves. If you're not a descendant of U.S. slaves, you are not an American Negro.
There you go.
If you are not a descendant of U.S. slaves, and no amount of my care for you as a human is going to change that reality. And the reality is there are only 40 million of us, right? There are a billion Black people in this world, but
maybe 50 million. They try to hide.
I go with 50. I'm cool.
Some of us don't answer our door.
Ooh, ain't that the truth? Right. Because ain't nobody's business what's going on up in my house. Right. So I've gotten backlash, but you know what? I've also gotten lots of praise. And I've seen a shift in the tide of conversation, political conversation, even at the grassroots level, about what people feel is okay to say. Because there are some ways, now, we're super perceptive about things, but we don't say stuff sometimes because ain't nobody listening, because I don't want to deal with these people and all their insults, or nothing I say is going to matter because these people just going to do what they want to do. So there's a way that popularizing and making part of the common like conversation, this idea that we are here as American freedmen, as the descendants of US slaves, to own our legacy and reclaim it without shame and with glory. There's value in normalizing that. And I've been honored to be a part of facilitating that in the small ways that I have.
It's part of your article that kind of, just brought the essence of Ice Cube contract for Black America up. And this is a portion here. We see more Black misleadership and how Congressional Black Caucus wasted 4 years disrespecting President Donald Trump instead of working with the leader of the free world to deliver on the economic and political interests of Black Americans. Now, when I read that, it reminds me of how Democrats, other Black people started to demonize Ice Cube because originally he went to the Democrats first with his contract. Oh, we'll talk to you, after, we get into the presidency or not. That's when we'll talk to you after. And Donald Trump, spoke to him. I'm not saying anything turned out, positive from any results, but at least he was willing to talk with him, and he got demonized by the Black community, quote unquote. But most of them are heavy Democratic led. So what are your thoughts on that?
Whew, okay, so this might get me some reactions. So I dragged Donald Trump too after some of the stuff that he was saying in his rallies, like hit him upside the head and I'll pay your bail. I could, all the stuff he was saying. It was a little much. It was unnecessary, right?
Absolutely.
So that turned me off a bit. And there are ways that we, I think, as Black Americans, expect political leaders to be perfect models of propriety, emotional regulation, and all that stuff. And that just ain't gonna happen. I mean, Barack did a pretty decent job that we know of, right? In being that, probably, right. So
if you ask the Black community, they'd be like, I don't know what he did for us.
Exactly. So I think that many people were turned off by Trump's behavior, his taking out that ad during the New York City case for those what turned out to be very innocent young men, his history that's been
Central
publicized.
Park 5,
yeah, thank you. The Central Park 5 and the history that's been publicized about the rentals with his dad and things like that. Right. There's some ways that I matured around my condemnation of Donald Trump's behavior and reconciling the fact that this man is the president of the United States and there's just some political stuff that I need to get done. And we ain't gonna visit each other's houses. We ain't gonna chill. We just need to get some political stuff done for the nation and Black Americans. So I think there are some ways that we need to be able to work with people who have the power, regardless of how those people show up, within reason.
I agree.
But I can't think of a circumstance where you should not talk to a sitting president of the United States because that person has the power to make things happen for you or to your detriment. So you need to be up in that room with him or her and having those.
I mean, I think in not doing so, let me be very intelligent when I say this, it's dumb as hell. That's dumb not to do so.
You're right. And so that's what I was calling out there. And for the CBC to be like, ew, I just, in hindsight, I just think it was kind of, as you say, dumb as hell and kind of silly. And I hope they felt good, better than thou. But in the meantime, there's lots of other stuff that's been happening during Trump's administration. They appropriated the Freedmen's Bank. The lady who used to run La Raza, the race, which look into its history for Hispanics, is now leading the Freedmen's Bank, and it's a BIPOC POC thing now, right? So They have further strengthened the offices of New Americans, which are state level offices that provide basically free stuff to illegal aliens, literally a red carpet. This is what the brouhaha in Chicago was about. And those offices of New Americans are all over the country, in places like New York, where Black folks, Negroes, are struggling on the regular, but they got illegal aliens living in 4-star hotels for free.
Absolutely.
And, providing childcare, legal services, free healthcare, free phones, just a whole deal.
That brings another question to mind. So you criticize certain Black leaders for supporting President Biden's immigration policies and diverting resources from the Black community. How do you believe that these actions are detrimental and bad for the interests of the Black community? As well, what some of the alternative actions you would suggest?
Such a good question. So we've bought into this belief as Black people. We're so compassionate. We're so caring. We don't want anybody to suffer,
unfortunately.
Right. We will light ourselves on fire so other people can be warm, right? We'll go without so so-and-so can eat. And we just need to stop. We need to stop being martyrs for the nation and the world. And I think the Black leadership class has bought into the idea that Black Americans need to save everybody, and that the way to get to equity for us Negroes to get to equity is to coalition with all these other brown people in the world who want to come here, rather than pulling our white countrymen up by the collar and telling them what you not gonna do is revert back to the Confederacy because we already done whoop they ass. So let's not have to whoop yours on top of it, right? There are some ways that we've taken this passive, I'm being bullied, so you other foreigners come help me, when we need to just snatch white people up, as we've done many, many, many times before. So yeah, I think their approach weakens us and makes us more passive than we should be, when we should be assertive, aggressive politically. And anyone who did, for example, you asked about examples, for example, any political party that does not have messaging and priorities for Negroes who are conferred special class, protected class status as descendants of slaves, I think we need to look at how it's possible that for decades and multiple administrations, you have nothing. Or have you committed some kind of constitutional collusion, rebellion, violation? And we need to be willing to adjudicate that civilly and go after people and absolutely cut them off at the knee if they have engaged in any kind of coordinated effort to deprive us of political representation. To have any political consultant said to Republicans, you got to not talk to Black people or Black Americans because you're going to turn off the Hispanics or you're going to turn off the so-and-so. To me, that's a violation of the Constitution. You can have your political approach to things, but to say that you're not going to represent Negroes, I think is a violation of the Constitution, my interpretation. And I'm willing to see that in court. And we should pursue those types of things.
Just piggybacking off some of the things you said, because we look at a lot of the immigration or pro-immigration, illegal immigration that comes out of the Biden administration, but you have other organizations that support it as well, like the NAACP, as well as Congressional Black Caucus. And we understand that these organizations, these groups run heavy Democrat. Do you believe that there's some ploy to use illegal immigration for the new voting base for the Democratic Party?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
That was easy.
Yes, I do. And I don't think it's just Democrats.
Oh, you think it's Republican as well?
That's a shell game. They point fingers at each other and they have us, you doing it. Yeah, no, it's both of them. Think about this. The massive amnesty that happened in 1986, who was the Republican that did that? Ronald Reagan.
Right.
Not only did he implement this massive amnesty, he didn't pursue and secure enforcement of the border to prevent more illegal immigration. And that's exactly what happened. So they set this precedent where we're going to turn all these law-breaking folk into citizens, and then we're not going to do anything to prevent the next bulk of people seeking an amnesty. And then George Bush attempted to get two more, to build political will for two more amnesties. Bush is a Republican. Republicans are business owners. There are plenty of small businesses, I think, are like 99% of the employee, like 50% of employees or something in the United States. There are plenty of Republicans who have those small businesses who, guess
Right.
what? Hire illegal aliens. So it's a whole country thing and an ethic where our countrymen really need to be focused on attending to each other. And being accountable. It's not a party thing, it's a country thing, and we really need to stop falling for the finger pointing when it's all of them.
This part of when we speak about the Congressional Black Caucus and going to their website very quickly, there's a lot of trick language with even in their mission statement or whatever you want to call this now. I've looked up the Hispanic, I look up the Asian one. They only speak about Hispanics and Asians. They don't speak about marginalized communities. They don't use that trick language because that's everybody. That's poor white people, that's Asians, that's Hispanics, that's everybody. They don't essentially spread their support for all these other issues that everyone would benefit from. They directly put a spotlight on the issues that affect their communities. Then we talk about minority-owned businesses, and this is the Congressional Black Caucus. Again, they have, like you stated before, they make us kind of the mule and the power behind all of these movements. So, I mean, believe me, I've done extensive research in it, and it's no longer, it's never been a secret, but now it's more so in your face than anything else. Because you mentioned the idea of of the so-called Black and Brown coalition and how it benefits other groups, but not the Black community. Now, can you provide some examples of how the coalition fails to support the interests of the Black community, and what steps do you think could be taken to ensure a more equitable partnership, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. You're absolutely right about the trick language. With some research that I did really quickly, I could share with some research that I did in collaboration, about 24 of the precincts, districts, 24 of the representatives in the CBC, and I believe there's 56 CBC members, about 24 of them come from predominantly Black districts. So I think the logic model is, again, did I lose you?
Now you just went off for a second. I don't know what occurred.
The logic model, again, is that Black-Brown coalition. I think the ways the coalition has failed is our interests are not always the same. And sometimes the interests that American Negroes have are in direct contradiction and conflict with the interests of the people in the Brown coalition. For example, if you pick a place, Venezuela, okay, and you want to get your mom and them over here, and we're saying we don't want chain migration where you can keep sponsoring your family members and so on and so forth, and you becoming this place where people just come in and rotate into the country, that's in direct contradiction with your interests. And are you going to say, all right, American Negro, you right. I can see why you would say that. So I'm going to go ahead and back up off wanting to get my mom and them over here because it's going to affect you. No, you're not going to do that. And especially when the Republicans and the Democrats are saying Hispanics are the future, you're going to feel like you have the power to do what you want to do, right? And that's exactly what's happened. I've been in plenty of political conversations with Hispanics and other brown, you see the air quotes, people. And they will say, Black people don't have enough power to do anything on their own. They're basically saying, you need me, and you're going to have to acquiesce to what I want. I don't think that's true. I don't think we've leveraged our political power. I think one of the ways the Black and Brown coalition has failed is it drills home this idea that Black people can't do anything without them. The reality is that there are about the same legal voters who are Black and who are Hispanic. There are more Hispanics in the country, but they also count illegal aliens and they also count children.
Yeah,
from the
absolutely.
census.
Yeah.
But there are about the same Black voters. How many of us feel disenfranchised and like, I ain't showing up because no matter what happens, nothing changes for me? How many of us have been disenfranchised because they done corralled us into some ridiculous criminal justice situation where they done convince you to plead for something that you ain't do, or they're going to overcharge you and get you convicted for something, or plead out for something that's going to compromise your right to vote? There are just so many ways that we have disengaged from the political process. And for the longer we do that, the more people are going to come into the country who
Absolutely.
will age up into voting age and the like. So I always say we have about 6 years to really make sure Black Americans fully embrace our Americanness and show up to the polls, grow candidates, show up in people's
Grassroots candidates.
offices.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Show up in
You know,
people's
my
offices.
thing is, I think, if we don't get it right this term coming up,
Mm.
it's going to be a long walk. I can tell you that. But you did say something about Joe Biden, and to prove you right, you're absolutely correct. Let me pop this up on the screen here. I don't know what occurred here. It's supposed to pop up, but I have the video of Joe Biden speaking about. So let me hide this on the screen. I might have to do a screen share. Give me 1 second here. Now, this is a very important video that a lot of people essentially probably have not seen, but it's very important to see. Let me back this up a little bit here. Listen to this.
Do support compensation for those families. Should the U.S. also compensate descendants of enslaved people? Do you support reparations for African Americans?
I support H.R. 40, which is the bill that has been proposed in Congress to establish.
Now, not really getting on Buttigieg, but he said, I support the study. I don't support no reparations now. So let me just point that out.
Thank you for that.
But we shouldn't wait for that commission to do its work to do things that are reparative. Remember, we're not talking about a gift to anybody. We're talking about mending what was broken. We're talking about the generational theft of the wealth of generations of African Americans. And just
fair use.
tossing out a racist policy and replacing it with a neutral one is not enough to deliver equality. Harms compound, just like a dollar saved in its value compounds over time. So does the value of a dollar stolen.
Now, the next question is to Joe Biden.
Must act immediately with investments in minority-owned businesses, with investments in health equity, with investments in HBCUs, and on the longer term, look at reparations so that we can mend what has been broken.
Vice President Biden, do you support reparations?
Look, I mean, since I haven't spoken on this, got a chance. Number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent.
Okay, so right there, that's already disrespectful. They asked him about reparations. He went right to immigration. So, what is your stance on, let's say, reparations? What's your stance on that?
So I want to make sure I don't have that echo.
Oh, okay. Let me go ahead.
Yeah, is that good? Awesome. So my stance on reparations, unlike Mayor Pete or Secretary Pete at this point, I am not interested in reparations that is solely an investment in institutions. I don't think Black Americans, descendants of slaves, should have to become consumers of any institution in order to be repaired. I think that the wealth was extracted by individuals that were part of families, and that those families, what's really reparatory is compensating those families for the slave lineage wealth gap, plus the repairs for the damages that have been done to those families directly. So like you cut me a COVID check, I'm gonna need you to send me a direct check to my mailbox and or direct deposit if we set up for that. I do think that there's a place for investments in institutions, but to me that comes after the direct payment to the descendants of U.S. slaves, not before, and definitely not in substitution.
I would definitely say the way I look at it is something on the lines similar, not exactly, to what Native Americans get. And some people, because of the multiple Native American treaties, oh, you're not a nation. And I'm like, well, the Native Americans wasn't a nation until the U.S. set aside sovereignty for them in order for them to sign the treaties, so they can get ongoing and preparatory reparations. So I
Yeah.
mean, when I look at it, everybody, we're using a lot of these terminologies, right? They have Native Americans, right? You were saying American Negro, I say foundational Black American. My brother, he's a more. It's so much there, and I'm trying to figure out, are there any solutions? I know I interviewed Marcel Dixon. I don't know you're familiar with him, at least twice already. He likes to use U.S. freedmen, right? So we have all these different terminologies to classify ourselves. A lot of us, we're definitely moving away from African American, because a lot of people and other groups can be grouped in, especially when they get their citizenship. And that can be very confusing when it comes to paying people out, because everybody is going to come out the woodwork, just like the $5 Indians, the white folk, when they started paying out the Native Americans. So where are you at in that space of labeling and these particular, different sections and groups that we have in the Black community that somewhat divides us? I mean, we're all kind of saying the same thing, but there are these little things here and there that really separate us on a broader scale. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you shared a lot there. So here's my general perspective, and I've maintained this perspective over time. Our names have changed over time in this country, literally, what they call us on paper. But the reality is, we're talking about the people who were the descendants of free Negroes who were not enslaved at the time of emancipation. However, they became free, right? If they had to do a Frederick Douglass, then knock a mofo out so that they could get their freedom, that's what they did. If they were never enslaved because of their family, whatever. Free Negroes who were not enslaved at the time of emancipation, and descendants of enslaved people who were emancipated. The 14th Amendment covered all of those people, right? The emancipation, all of these. So for me, I hone on the fact that we're talking about those people. You can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself from my book. I am not interested in fighting people over policing their language. I think it serves my ego, but it does not serve the purpose of coalition, and my ego ain't that big. Now, there are ways in which Negro is on the papers, the books, legislation. Freedmen is on the papers, the books. To me, freedmen is the protected class status that is designed to be reparatory in nature. But they also refer to us as Black in those debates when you read the Congressional minutes.
Yes.
They also refer to us as Negro. When you read Special Field Order 15, Negro is thrown all up in there. I ain't giving up nothing. When we talk about African American, that was also talking about a time at which, really, when that was adopted, the percentage of people who were immigrants into the nation was relatively minimal. So all those terms belong to us. We need to be okay, I think, with claiming all of them and using them in their proper context. Freedmen, protected class status. Call me what I want in my day-to-day. I refer to myself as Negro. I use Negro in my writings. I use Black American in my writings. I use freedmen in my writing. I am normalizing using all of it to refer to the same group. So that's where I stand. And I think the feedback that I've heard from people, since I do a lot of Twitter spaces and things like that, is one of the reasons people enjoy coming to my space. And I get various people. I get the folks who identify as Native or Indigenous, right? Aboriginal folks who have ties to Native Americans. I am one of those people. I've known that from family history. I also know that from DNA. There are plenty of other people just like me, right? Not every Black American has that, but plenty of other people do. The freedmen are in my spaces. I even sometimes have immigrants in my spaces who are freedmen supporters. I have all groups in my spaces because what I'm not trying to do is make people kowtow to the way I see things. I'm trying to make sure that we're all focused on repair for those people who are descendants of free Negroes, and the descendants of U.S. slaves. That's what's important.
Absolutely. Do you believe that Democrats and Republicans practice white supremacy in some form or fashion in these sort of controversial rhetoric, anti-Black policies they impose?
Do they practice white supremacy? I am not evading the question, but I want you to operationally define white supremacy for me.
Dominance over a group simply because of their color. I mean, white supremacy has a very large definition if someone goes and ramble about it, but it's basically a group of people based upon skin color thinking they're supreme over another group. And because they're the dominant society around the world, because it's a global system of white supremacy, when we look at, let's say, for instance, Africa, where majority of the countries are dark melanated people. But when you look at who's pulling the strings or who are the puppet masters of those people, you see the system of white supremacy is controlling not only the political figures in place, but also have control over their resources. So when we look at things, whether in America or not, who's controlling the politics, who is controlling the economy, the GDP, all these things. So whether we like it or not, there's always, unfortunately, a group of people, and I'm not saying some sort of small group of people or a cabal, but collaboratively as a group, not saying all white people or white supremacists, I'm not stating that, but there's a large group of people who wear suits who control the mass majority of people through supremacy. And it's based upon skin color.
So thank you for that. And I'm glad you defined it. In some of my Newsweek articles, you will see me refer to white supremacy, including naming it as a factor.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, what do you believe white supremacy is?
I don't think the presence of white people in itself, or even groups of white people in power, is inherently white supremacy. I do believe that there are a significant number of white people who believe that they have the right and obligation to control political dynamics because they have the power to control political dynamics. And I believe those people have a variety of reasons of why they feel that way. One of them being racial, because they want to dominate racially. And the other being, because I have the power, I'm going to use it how I want to. So a pragmatic approach. So do I think white supremacy is a thing? Absolutely. Do I think it's a small thing? No, I think it's a significant thing. And I think anti-Black American racism and bias is a significant thing, and not just from white Americans, but also from
not just
migrants, immigrants, and
definitely that has white ideology, that has
anti-Black ideology.
Likewise.
Because in India they have a caste system, and there are folks in India who they look like me, some of them are mistreated based on color as well. So
no, I interviewed Shweta Agra, who is a British Indian who wrote a book called The Black Rose, and was speaking about the colorism that they have in India. And so India is suffering from, massive, large amounts of skin bleaching. A lot of them are addicted to skin bleaching to lighten their skin, because she was stating that, she was a lot darker. She was almost my complexion before she became addicted to skin bleaching to lighten her skin. And then there's all these, clips on TikTok of how Indians are actually skin bleaching their children to be lighter. And we understand that essentially came from them being colonized for 200 years by the British too, though. So, I mean, that's a large part of their history.
But see, it didn't, though. So I did this Twitter space.
You believe it doesn't? You don't think it played a role in it?
I did a Twitter space last year about color caste and racism and the dismantling of affirmative action. And I had some folks from India who were interested in joining and had plenty of back channel conversations about it. And they clarified for me, and I did my own research on it as well, that the caste system in India, based on the Hindu religion, is 4,000 plus years old. And there is a color component to that. Now, did European colonization, yes, 4,000 years old. Okay. Now, did colonization by Europe and Europeans' sense of supremacy in their own skin color and presence influence that? Probably, right? It's hard to
probably was the catalyst. Yeah.
But yeah, they already had a caste system, so it was easy enough to layer on, and a quite discriminatory one, even till today. And they continue to talk about it. So it was easy to layer on the color element to that as well.
Wow. The term woke. Do you believe that, especially, your friend, your buddy, I'm just kidding, Ron DeSantis, do you think that's a trope word that he's using in replacement of, pretty much talking about Black people?
I think for some people, that's the case, specifically. I think for some people, it's anything that I don't agree with. I think for some people, for others, it is a legitimate pushback against some of the crazy social change that's happening right now, such as the idea that a man who thinks he's a woman is a real woman and has the right to invade women's spaces. The idea that children who are 2 years old have sexual choice, including the ability to make choices about sexual contact with adults. The idea that that the U.S. is beyond borders. So I think there are some ways that the pushback against the liberal agenda is legit. I absolutely disagree with the bastardization of our legitimate social justice rally cry of stay woke. And whenever I'm in conversations with people, and I talk to plenty of white folks, I talk to plenty of all kinds of people, personally or professionally. If they ever go into using woke in that way, I call them out and tell them that I don't use that term in that way. And I would appreciate if you don't bastardize it in my presence, because under no circumstances is stay woke or woke actually a negative thing. Whether you're a lefty or a righty, I don't want to hear it.
I do agree with that. I would just say that me personally, I always challenge them. What does it mean?
Oh, absolutely.
99.9 of them have no idea what it means. They think it's talking about LGBTQ and all this. All that has nothing to do with any of those things. That anything that we pretty much promote within the Black community, they figure out a way to co-opt it or they take it and run.
And the left did co-opt it, and they turned it into that thing. And then the right came out with defining woke as anything, like all those other things. So that's why I call it out. And it's funny, I was doing a Twitter space, and I think it was about the word. And I asked a couple of different people who were speaking, can you define it? And one young man stammered all over himself in his inability to define the word. And so you are absolutely right. But that's my approach. I think woke, stay woke is legit. And I will never allow people to bastardize it in my presence in conversation. And I do challenge it for sure.
Absolutely. Now, this piece you had in your article, DEI industry is selling us out to an intersectional coalition that demands Black elected officials kiss the ring of migrants, the LGBTQIA plus alphabet community, and various other people, I added that in, of color, while giving nothing in return for our community. For us to get anything as Black Americans, we have to get our political agenda approved by illegal aliens, sexual minorities, and new Americans. Can you go a little bit more in depth about that piece?
So I think that's that whole, minorities against white people thing. And there can be no oppression Olympics sort of theory of change, which is that in order for us, which is brown people and everybody else who's considered a minority, an aggrieved population, in order for us aggrieved people to win, all of us have to coalesce and go against white people, right? Straight, Christian, heterosexual, like white folk. And so when I talked earlier about how, in having conversations with immigrants and Hispanics in particular, how they take the posture that, well, since we have so many numbers, you can't do anything without us. It's similar to that kind of thing, where when we look at, for example, how the trans movement has transformed social dialogue, social mores, and all of that in such a short period of time, you have to know that American Negroes, it's not that we didn't have the ambition to do that. It's that because those people are white, and they're white men in particular, and because white women and other people who bought into this idea of all aggrieved people against, the status quo, essentially, which is heterosexual and or white, they have a lot of power to just steamroll people to do what they want to have happen. And so for Black Americans to be seen as not Black white supremacist, we have to we are expected to, because we don't have to, we are expected to rubber stamp all those other special interest groups and their agendas. Otherwise, we're called xenophobic, transphobic, and all the other things. And
All
really,
the other things.
it's not even about that for me. It's that freedmen, descendants of slaves, all the things have a unique place in this country. And I don't care who you are or what you've been through, you can't hold a candle to that. And we should never allow you to position yourself as co-equal to that. It's a detriment to what we are trying to accomplish and the way we need to secure our own legacy in this country. And if that makes me phobic, then I think you have a definition problem, and perhaps you have a moral character problem for trying to actually steal equity from the descendants of U.S. slaves. I hope that answered your question.
No, you did. It just kind of makes me think of, are you familiar with Cori Bush?
Yes.
And also, are you familiar with the House Resolution 414? And United States has a moral and legal obligation to provide reparations for the enslavement of Africans and its lasting harm on the lives of millions of Black people in the United States. Now, already the title just throws me the wrong way, okay? But most importantly, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I agree.
Oh, and most importantly, you know, I'm tracking it, so to speak, but I don't really want it to pass because of some trick language that I found down here. It's quite a bit of it, but this in particular, this paragraph here, whereas to meet the international legal obligation of reparations, the federal government must compensate descendants of enslaved Black people and people of African descent in the United States to account for the harms of chattel slavery, blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts?
So I came to the reparations movement domestically from the international reparations movement. Somehow, many, many years ago, I found myself in the international UN space related to women back when Obama was doing his thing with that. And I found myself in some international reparations spaces. And part of my discontent was the way that they were framing descendants of American slaves as the entire Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
And I kept going, well, who are we talking about here, right? So, because to me, when I talk about reparations for CARICOM, which I supported when it first came out, I'm talking about CARICOM. I was like, yes, get that money, get that repair, get the whatever you get. I'm gonna support you in that.
From Europe.
It never occurred to me, literally never occurred to me to try to insert American Negroes into that. Never occurred to me.
Never.
And I kept seeing that kind of thing where it was clear to me that we ain't on the same page. And so the language that they were using, descendant of American slaves, is the language that they were using. It had a meaning that it didn't look like it had and didn't work for me. And so when the whole movement happened around American descendants of slaves, I was like, absolutely. And I was never part of the organization. I'm not a joiner for the most part, but I certainly knew about it. And I forget who invited me. I took to it early on because it was clear to me that what was happening internationally was going to be a theft. And those people have a lot of power, And so my thought on Cori's rendition of HR 40 basically is she's been the most honest one. She didn't put it on paper. We want reparations for the descendants of Black people, the descendants of enslaved Black people, and reparations for Africa. She's been the most honest one of the people in the US, the CBC. I am curious to know. I don't want to say too much about legal argumentation because I don't like giving stuff away. I have some nuanced thoughts about that. What I will say is in no way should the diaspora, and when I speak of diaspora, I'm talking about people outside of the United States, should they ever seek to steal from the descendants of US slaves? And far too often, and I just disrupted, and I do that a lot, I just disrupted a Zoom meeting and I asked the question, why are y'all not listening to us when we are telling you that you're coming over here and talking about African reparations is harming our reparatory momentum that the grassroots really got started. Because I can tell you right now,
Yeah.
I'm a doer. I get stuff done. I tried to join NARC when it was doing its thing, and I found out about
Well,
them
you
in the
know why you
international
couldn't
space.
join now.
They never responded. They continually recruited me and had me sign letters to be on the email list. In Cobra,
no.
same thing. I never got information. They weren't active, is my point. They weren't active.
Okay.
And so once the momentum got started domestically with the grassroots people, then I started to see them doing a lot more. So they, in some ways, co-opted the momentum from the American descendants of slaves folks, the people who were going about getting reparations reinvigorated at the domestic level. So does America as a country owe anything to Africa? I don't know. It's not my fight right now. And what I'm seeing is that Africans seems to be intent on stealing from us rather than seeing that our precedent for reparation is a precedent for other people. Does Britain owe stuff to Africa? Yep. Portugal? Yep. I can definitely declare those things. But none of that requires them shoehorning to our repair and trying to take any portion of what we deserve. That's all.
Well, I mean, you very intelligent lady. I know you know why. It's because we're getting closer to the bag.
Right.
And as we get closer, they see this, and it's either out of jealousy or want to be grouped in just to get,
opportunity. It's opportunity. It's opportunity.
Absolutely.
And that's what I noticed in the international movement is that, first of all, it was very disjointed. And I don't like that. I'm also a process person, and I like to be really efficient and get things done. Like, I'd like to mark things off. It's very disjointed, a whole bunch of talking. I don't like a whole bunch of talking. Like, where we're trying to go, okay, these are the steps that we need to get there. Let's get about the business. We'll check in a week. Like, I need process. And it was just a bunch of talk, and I don't need talk. I need movement, action. I need steps. And I wasn't seeing that. But and it really was the ADOS movement, as far as I can tell, that really reinvigorated and reignited the domestic reparations conversation in the United States. Once that started, then I started to see more organization from even the international community and what they're doing now. And when I tell you these people are powerful, because I'm still involved in some ways, and of course, I keep it 100 in every space that I'm in, whoever I'm talking to. I keep saying, even in those spaces, how is this going to affect the descendants of U.S. slaves? Let's be mindful about, right? But those people are powerful. There are folks who contact working groups to advise them on policy in the U.S. government at the highest levels of government. So Pan-Africanism has a significant weight and hold on the imagination of leaders. While we want, and I'm going to say this really quickly, just as an advice, and I've said it in other spaces, for Black Americans, freedmen, all the things, who are descendants of slaves, who are interested and able to navigate in those kinds of waters. And what I mean by that, it's a different space. The international space is just a different space. For those who are interested in operating in those spaces, you need to be there. Because there are conversations that are happening in those rooms. I think the UN they have a UN meeting on tomorrow, I think. You need to be in those spaces because significant framing of message and legitimizing of organizations is happening at the international level. And it does indeed trickle down and ripple out from there in some ways.
Do you know of any political candidates that you see that can be beneficial for Black Americans? I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of grassroots, ones that we never essentially heard of, but what of any of the big names out there do you believe?
I can't say always, I criticize the CDC for not working with Donald Trump because of his ability to speak to even better than or more directly than Barack Obama, even the CDC speaks to. Black people, period, right? Not black
Right,
and brown
right.
and other, like he was like African Americans. He didn't feel a need to put a comma on it and all that stuff.
Nope.
I think that we haven't maximized, capitalized, exploited, tapped out all the potential of all the players on the board. We just don't talk to people. We're like, man, I don't got time to be talking to him. He's just a white racist anyway. We don't talk to people. I need you to go ahead and call me a nigga in your congressional office. That's what I need you to go ahead and do. And please do that, as a matter of fact, because then I got something that I can work with on you. But like, we don't talk to folks. And I get it, because we don't want to deal with people who aren't even trying to make stuff happen in the first place, but we don't really know. Other groups are in all the rooms with even the people they think hate them, because you have the power to say yes. So I would like to see us tap all of the stakeholders advocating for our agenda, educating about our agenda, and providing an agenda, a specific thing that they can implement with, and telling them how to do it. And that includes Tim Scott, which people like to write off as a sellout. I'm not saying he is or he isn't. I am saying that he is still a person with power, and they all need to be accountable to us, period.
So when President Biden gave his acceptance speech or feedback on one of his speeches, he was stating that the Black American community had his back and he has our back. Do you remember those words? I know I did, because I don't feel like he has my back. But anyway, he gave Asian Americans an anti-hate crime bill through the way of the COVID-19, but it distinctly said Asians. Why do you think he hasn't given us one?
Well, the easy answer is white supremacy, right? And I'm not saying that's not a factor.
That is the easy answer.
And it's not necessarily wrong. I do think there are ways that, have we advocated for it, and have our stakeholders in position of power advocated for it? Or are there ways that folks in positions of power, like the CDC and the like, are so bought into the Black-Brown coalition that they wouldn't even accept the bill if it wasn't an everybody bill?
Right.
And are there ways that we accept scraps and piecemeal stuff instead of a solid bill that addresses a thing? And are there portions of the American population, white and other, who require that political stakeholders not provide directly to the descendants of US slaves? And I talked earlier about if folks have colluded to deprive descendants of slaves of representation. And when I say that, I'm not talking hyperbole. I'm literally talking about identifying any organizations that in any parts of their platforms, or candidates in any parts of their platforms or public statements or any leaked documents, demonstrate that they are intentionally withholding representation from the interests of descendants of slaves. That's a lawsuit. And I think we should be willing to really go after people in all the ways, including petitioning. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Including petitioning the government to look at if there's a 14th Amendment violation by those people engaging with the DNC, if they've required that we delay or obstruct representation, the RNC. I think we need to get ignorant and legal with some people and force people to do what they should have been doing in the first place and stop playing nice.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say for a lot of Black Americans, I will have to believe, I can't speak for us all, we're not a monolith, that this was straight disrespect. Especially, we don't even have to go through everything we've been through. Everybody knows. So yeah, but when we talk about this, it's kind of a smack in the face, especially on one hand, you say, oh, I have your back. And on the other hand, immigration, I'm pro-immigration, not in damn near anti-Black in a sense with your policies.
Right.
And you see the damage that it does. And what's funny is, I know I'm jumping around a bit here, but he allowed massive caravans to come inside the country. They had a sort of catch and release inside of America. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's happening right now. Essentially, that's
Right.
why people are turning them in. They're not turning themselves in. They're not even running anymore. They're just
Right. And then, non-citizens can be police officers, go to school. I mean, there's really no benefits, in my opinion, and it's probably one or two, of being a U.S. citizen other than getting a passport. I mean, you can go to school, you can be a police officer, you can get an ID card, you can definitely work for the illegal, Southern white men who are hiring you on their farms and their manufacturing plants. I mean, did I say that? My bad.
I mean, tell it, call it, tell it,
Yeah,
tell it.
yeah.
So there are benefits. Okay, so let's reel back our irritation. There are definitely benefits to U.S. citizenship.
Okay.
So this thing we're experiencing right now is an administration-specific failure, not even failure, refusal to actually implement laws in the book and gain operational control of the southwestern border. That's a temporary thing. Your citizenship is forever. And if you are a descendant of U.S. slaves, free Negro, descendant of free Negroes, right? The freedmen people, that's for the rest of as long as you keep producing descendants of Ross, that citizenship goes with you.
Correct.
The same cannot be said for illegal aliens who come into this country as America wakes up to the invasion that is underway. So there are definitely benefits to citizenship. Right now, there are some unequal protections and unequal resource allocations that are happening toward illegal aliens. I frankly think, once again, Black people are so nice that we'd be like, well, if you're doing that for them, you need to do it for me too. I want you to stop doing it for them and do it for me. Can we say that and not feel
We definitely can say
selfish?
that.
I don't know
that's
how
what
many Black folks
Chicago's
are willing
saying.
to say that.
Chicago's speaking out, finally.
They are, and that's a good thing.
I'm waiting for the New Yorkers, but New York is such a mixed bag. I don't think.
Right.
Yeah, New York is a rough one.
Yeah. So there's definitely benefits. And I know we've been through so much. And it's like we follow the script. So, we do the education thing. We try to keep our noses clean. We take care of our families. We, like all the stuff, right? Or enough of the stuff. And we get frustrated because we continually get blindsided by all the stuff that happens. But we need to lean into our Americanness and again, be willing to beat the brakes off of anyone who gets in our way. And we need to leverage the hell out of all of the legislation, constitutional amendments, all the things, and understand those things. Because there's stuff I'm learning about still. Ain't nobody mentioned none of this stuff to me, right?
Nope.
Earning a doctorate degree and did Black history for study and all the things I ain't never heard of. A lot of the stuff that I'm continually finding out now. So we need to lean into our legacy, teach our children about it, and carry that stuff with honor for the rest of our days. And really, when I say beat the brakes off of people, I mean, we're going to have to I mean that literally, but I mean, in all the ways that force people to comply with the legislation that's on the books, that people had the forethought and the courage to put on the books for our protections, we need to leverage that stuff in all the ways that we can.
Well said. Is there anything else like you will want to cover or speak on behalf?
Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, Ross, and thank you so much for having me on. I would say, yeah, I've enjoyed it. People can follow me on Twitter. And when I say follow me on Twitter, that just means I'll probably end up having a conversation with you and all the other things. My Twitter handle is P Denise Long, first initial. Yeah, you go. We might have to take that off for the echo. Yeah. And I write for Newsweek. You can find my author's page at Newsweek when you Google me, or you can go to my Twitter page, and then there's a link to my Muck Rack for journalists. I write on Medium, which you can also find on Muck Rack. I would just encourage Black Americans to, and I know I keep saying this, but I really mean it, lean into our Americanness. This country is ours. 100,000%. Blood, bones, sweat, equity is ours. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And I've been tired, trust and believe, before. And if you get tired of the fight, just tap out for a bit and tap somebody else in, because there's plenty of people in the fight now. And I think we've learned enough and have seen enough to make sure that we wrap it up and that we stay in both offense and defense mode for ourselves and for the rest of our progeny from these days forward. So
this one last note, and we were speaking about the different labeling and terms that we use. You know, the one that's far removed for me is African American. And I have so much with that, but I'll just leave you with this one piece. We don't go around calling white people European Americans. Just call them white or American. And that's when I agree with leaning towards our, you know, being strong within our American versus using terms that connect us to a different place, which other groups, the dominant society, white people, do not do that. They just have white on the census. When you look up census.gov, it says white. It don't say white and or European American. And it says white, and then it tells you who is considered white. I know it's
No,
it's
can we talk about that for a second? I appreciate what you're saying. I do appreciate what you're saying. And we have to recognize and kind of honor the reason they did that. In that there are plenty of us, right, who have a good ton of African ancestry. And when we say African, we talk about, I mean, my stuff is all over the continent. I like literally the whole thing. And so can I identify as being one thing? I can't. So they assigned the whole continent to these folks who were the descendants of US slaves and free Negroes, because you could not identify at that time with one particular continent. So I look at the historical rationale for it. And also at that time, there was this, what did they call it, Ross? Cultural disconnection or deprivation or something kind of theory. I think it's cultural deprivation theory, where they were looking at Black Americans and the fact that we didn't have a culture or homeland. But again, look, we were looking for home somewhere else. So, right, exactly. So I honor why they did it. I also want to own it because they got stuff on the books that belong to us where they put that name on it. That's really why I want to own it. And because there's a connection to Africa. That's legit. But that don't mean that Africa gets to step into our reparations. That doesn't mean that I am less American, right? And I think we just have to be able to hold all those truths at the same time.
I think for me, when I was saying, you know, I get into those conversations and I'm playing within semantics, right? So we go here, census.gov, and you look up white, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Then you come down to Black or African American, and then it states a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. It's so much to go here because essentially Africans didn't label themselves or call themselves Black. They just called themselves whatever they were, tribal, their names originally. And so when I look at this, that's why I kind of play semantics with, like, there's a lot going on here, because you look at all these other groups, they don't have that. We're the only group that have that. Say that again.
We're unique people, and that's going to change.
Yeah.
That OMB census form you're looking at, yeah, that's going to change for sure.
Oh yeah, that's the census.gov, and that's the most updated one. But like you said, hopefully it changes, and you said it will change, so I believe you.
It has to change. If it doesn't change, there's going to be some problems. So
yeah, because I don't get that. That'll start a whole nother conversation about Hispanics labeling themselves as white and allowing it, but then when you say white alone, not Hispanic, white people are only like 60-something% of the population. And that it's so weird when you look at the census numbers. There's 76% of the population. Then when you come down and say white alone, they're only 76% white alone, not Hispanic. They're 60-something%. So that means that the number of Hispanics actually is more than 19%. So that's about right from the data that I looked at, because the data that I looked at had Black Americans at 15%. But remember, when they count Hispanics, they're also counting illegal aliens, and there's a lot of them, and they're counting children. And when you say illegal aliens, right? Are they that's more of an estimation because they actually don't know.
Well, the census counts people in a household, period. It is an estimation, and I forget how they
Because if you're
make
illegal in the country,
educated
I'm not
guesstimates.
answering the door. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Yeah, but a lot of illegals also live with their legal family members.
Okay.
That's
It kind of gives them cover a little bit.
Yeah, there was a poll, there was an article that came out in between 2018 and 2022, where they were asking people about their Hispanics, about their household. And they were talking about, they were able to estimate the number of people who have an illegal alien in their household.
Wow.
And it was pretty significant.
Okay.
Millions.
Oh, definitely. I
Yeah.
know. I live in Texas, so yeah.
Yeah, and Texas is a whole nother interesting thing. You think when you go into Texas,
Yeah.
you're gonna get cowboy hats and shotguns and pickup trucks. No.
No.
You're gonna get lots of Hispanics, depending on which part, lots of Indians and or other like Chinese, Asian, and the
Oh,
like.
definitely a lot of Indians.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's an interesting place.
The only thing I guess I have, a problem with people from other countries is they left their country to come here for whatever reason. Fear of persecution, more opportunities, more land, the ability to live better. Then they talk about America as though it's some shit country, but you left your country and you're staying here. You won't go back. So yeah, like I said, I have so much that I don't want it to grow to something to be something so demeaning of other people. But that's always heavy on my heart because I hear other groups saying America is this and American, is that. And I'm just like, well, you can just fly back. No issues.
I think a lot
anyway.
of people hate the United States. I think a lot of people are here to take what they can. And I do believe there are people are here to cause problems and to destroy America as we know it. And there are people who are here because they feel entitled to what we have to offer because they feel that America has wronged them in some way.
Well, thank you, Denise. I do appreciate your time, sister. Lots of information you're giving us. And hopefully we can do this later sometime in the future. I do appreciate your time, though.
I'd love to come back and I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
All right. You have a good evening.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. We're out.